what's interesting about this is that I think we should value the strong disagreement about the word. If I were to write a book about well-being economies, I mean, who would be against that? The corporations would love it. The government would love it. The radical leftists would love it. Everyone would love it. And therefore, that concept will lose all of its transformative power. If you want to change a system, you need to have words that create dissensus. And degrowth is doing precisely this. You throw it in a discussion, half of the people are going to feel so energized, being like, hell yeah. And the other half is going to be like, hell no. And then good. That means we can start working.
We are on an adventure to unite the stories and solutions of the pioneers, creating a better future for all. Together, we will journey to every continent, every country and community, and ask the question, what is the future you dream of? We will explore the blockers to us getting there, and we will ask, what will it take? What do we need? What do you need to create a future where we all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other? In this episode, we welcome Timothée Parrique, pioneering proactivist, passionate about degrowth. Timothée is a researcher, economist, and scientist who focuses in questions about degrowth, post-growth, and post-capitalism. We explore what degrowth is, how it can be defined, why it needs to exist, and what it means in practice. What practical policies can we adopt, and examples where they are working. You can read the action takeaways from this episode, comment, co-create future episodes, and connect with fellow changemakers in the Future Planet community of action by visiting futureplanet.love to sign in or sign up. Let's get into it. It's a big pleasure to welcome Timothée Parrique, pioneering proactivist, passionate about degrowth. So I'm super looking forward to getting into this topic with you, diving in, exploring your world, joining our worlds together. For the person or the people that are listening, maybe you might like to share a little bit about you. Who are you? Like, who is arriving today? Who have we got the pleasure of hearing from? Who are you?
Hello, everyone. So I'm a researcher. So I'm a scientist, basically. So I work full-time at university, and I try to answer research questions. I'm French. I've been studying and researching economics for quite a while. And right now I'm employed at the University of Lund in southern Sweden, where I'm focusing and trying to answer questions about degrowth, post-growth, and post-capitalism.
Yeah, I love it. And it's not that you're just a researcher, right? Like, you are very expansive in your sharing. There's a lot of, for me, you are one of the leading pack in this pioneering new element that we're all thinking about, or part of philosophy that we need to think about, which is degrowth, which is people are realizing that no longer can we just keep striving for never-ending growth. It's just not going to work. We don't live in the world where the 80s of excess hedonism. In fact, we live in a very different world where we understand and know that we only have a finite amount of we have planetary boundaries, and so we can't keep growing at the pace that we have been. And so we need a new way of feeling, thinking, and being about that. What is degrowth?
Wow, that came out of nowhere. What is degrowth? Okay, well, there are two ways of defining degrowth. First and foremost, it is a paradigm. So when I say paradigm, I mean a body of ideas with assumptions, with values, with principles, just like sustainable development or communism, or, a lot of different concepts that are more complicated than what they sound. I'm usually saying this at the beginning to avoid degrowth is a synonym with decrease of everything. No, it's a whole paradigm that has been unfolding since the beginning of the 2000s with ramification from the 1970s. And so on these kind of level of ideas, degrowth is a critique of economic growth as a system. So you could say growth obsessed or growth based economies. So basically, among scholars, we would say, a critique of the hegemony of economic growth, meaning the priority that is being given to the maximization of financial indicators, GDP, profits, income over social, and ecological indicators. So you have this, what we call also like objection to growth or growth criticism. That's how degrowth came to be. That's half of what degrowth is, and the other half is a concrete phenomenon. So degrowth in that sense, and I can give you a one-sentence definition that I'm working on right now that is based on the one I've developed in French, but I've got a bit of troubles to adapt it in English in a way that sounds
I would love
nice.
it in French first. French first.
Okay.
French first, then English. Yeah.
So in French, and I developed this in my French book, Ralentir ou périr, l'économie de la décroissance, which here I'm using to up my mic. So you can see it's a multi-functional. You can use it to block a door, start a fire, or learn about degrowth.
Or start a revolution, I think. Or
Oh,
evolution,
yeah.
I should say.
Multi-functions, as I said, so many things. And so in that book, I define it as, and I'm going to give you in French and then I translate, une réduction de la production et de la consommation pour alléger l'empreinte écologique, planifiée démocratiquement dans un esprit de justice sociale et dans le souci du bien-être. So basically that translates into a downscaling of production and consumption to lighten ecological footprints, planned democratically in a way that is equitable and for the sake of improving well-being. And to dissect it for you, there are 5 blocks in that definitions that matter. The first one, downscaling of production and consumption. So here we understand is the opposite of economic growth. You know, economies, they're boring creatures. They can do 3 things. They can get bigger, they can stay the same size, or they can get smaller. And when they get bigger, we call that economic growth. When they stay the same size, we call this secular stagnation or just stagnation. And when they get smaller, usually we call it recession or depression. Well, so a downscaling of production and consumption, but to make the difference between degrowth, which is a bit more specific than a usual recession, we add these kind of 4 principles of organization: sustainability, democracy, justice, and well-being. So the downscaling of production and consumption needs to reduce ecological footprint. That's why we're doing it in the first place. It's not, it's a macroeconomic diet to lose weight. It's not just for fun. And and we'll see why afterwards, we have to reduce production and consumption in order to lighten our ecological footprints, then we better plan it so that it is just and convivial. By just, I mean that it's proportional, that we're not asking everyone to, tighten their belt, but we're taking into account inequalities between countries, within countries, between generations, and all of that, between species. And so we plan it so that actually it is a just transition. And we also plan it so that the diet, doesn't start with the things that are most important for well-being. If you have to shut down stuff in your economy, you don't start with schools and hospital, right? You start with mall and airports. And even if you have to shut down an airport, you don't start with, diplomats and doctors and, urgent things. You start with, shopping weekends and national flights and some that can be easily substituted. So inherent in that concept of degrowth is a concern for well-being. And so that planning basically the slowing down, which is something quite historically unprecedented. Usually it happens as a crisis, and economies are struggling with that, but planning that kind of slowdown in a way that it brings some kind of progress in the sense of improving sustainability, which is the functioning of an economy over the long term, while also reducing inequality. And I dare to say also improving well-being by just making your economy smaller, but focusing more on the kind of stuff that have an intense well-being footprint, while just shrinking other sectors that are either counterproductive in improving quality of life or just quite decorrelated from these indicators.
Can I let that sit with us as we kind of absorb it, receive it? What's arriving for me, I don't know where we're going to go, but this is where we're going to go right now. Like, what's arriving for me is, are you using the right words, or are we using the right words? And so I'm curious about this, right? So at the moment, the words are, and there's other things we can talk about, but this is just things arriving for me at the moment. Critical thing with communication is, are we able to connect with people in a way that they feel that they want to take in what we're sharing, embody it within themselves, and act in a different way in that day, in that week, in that month? We're asking people to take action in what they do. And So when I think about smaller or degrowth or slowing down, I understand why some of us feel like slowing down feels nice to do, like we're slowing down in our lives. I'm also curious about this. We had a lady called Michelle Holiday talking about the art of thriving. And so we were talking about words that we share and how some words are masculine, some words are feminine, some words feel challenging and some words feel easier. And your proposition is you're proposing a very logical solution. Let's just rebuild a new system. Let's prioritize things that feel important to do. And the things that are less important, let's remove them so we can reduce our ecological footprint. That feels really, really pragmatic. I love it. Can definitely get behind that. But I wonder if we'll face friction and resistance around the way that we're communicating those words. And how would you transition? How would we transition to start removing some of those blockers, which are also, for example, these very structures that have been built almost in our church of capitalism, have been built for so long, right? GDP, growth, quarterly reporting, all of these things. So we have a challenge there. We have a language challenge, we have a narrative challenge, and we also have a structural challenge. How do we move through that?
So to your question, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. And when I was deciding on the title of my book, which I published in September last year, which translates into Slow Down or Perish, the economics of degrowth, I was hesitating quite a lot between the economics of degrowth or the economics of post-growth. And words matter. And I was just having this in my head, like what you said, like degrowth is a word that is, some people tend to resist, like instinctively when they first hear it. But I decided to go with degrowth for a few reasons. The first one is, I'm an ecological economist. So most of what I do is looking at the biophysical budgets of countries and basically telling whether or not our economies are sustainable. And now, like, the degree of overshoot we're witnessing in high-income countries is so massive that the priority should really be on decreasing that massively. So all kind of like cold shower terms, shutdown, dismantlement, slowing down, degrowth, sabotage, whatever you want, that is going to cause us like, oh, wait a second, that's good. It's like what has been termed a missile word. It's kind of making us think. What's interesting about this is that I think we should value the strong disagreement about the word. If I were to write a book about well-being economies, who would be against that? The corporations would love it, the government would love it, the radical leftists would love it, everyone would love it, and therefore that concept will lose all of its transformative power. If you want to change a system, you need to have words that create dissensus. And degrowth is doing precisely this. You throw it in a discussion, half of the people are going to feel so energized, being like, hell yeah. And the other half is going to be like, hell no. And then good. That means we can start working. It doesn't mean that the whole of the discussion is going to be about degrowth, but it means that it's a good concept to kickstart a discussion, and then you can connect it to other concepts like convivialism, like steady state economy, like post-growth, like social and solidarity economy, like regenerative businesses, like the circular economy, like the bioeconomy, like the economy for the common good, and we can continue like this for a very long time. What's important here is today, if we look at historical tendencies, we're not going in the right direction. And so we need to admit that somehow we need new strategies. We need plan Bs. And what we've been doing so far is this kind of green growth at the heart of sustainable development, which does not acknowledge the fact that we have to choose between producing more or polluting less. It kind of assumes that we can produce more and pollute less. Scientifically, that view has been falsified. There is no scientific evidence today showing that this producing more, polluting less, which we call the theory of decoupling, holds any water. And if you cannot show that, it means, like, as we've seen, economies, they can only do three things: that either you can decrease your ecological footprint enough while maintaining your economy at the same size, so stagnation. For our income nation, that does not work because we've been accumulating so much overshoot. So it means you only have one option. You do need to produce and consume less. And if that is so, I think we need to call it what it is. We cannot sugarcoat people and calling this like the happy, sustainable world of, local green well-being. We need to produce and consume less. And that is asking for a radical rethinking of how we organize the entire economy. And I think that's a good thing. And last point on that is the concept right now is exploding in its popularity. It's never been as popular since it emerged in 2002. Like in a couple of weeks, I'll be in Brussels at the European Parliament. We have a 3-day conference on Beyond Growth. People are starting to do PhDs and master theses on the topic everywhere. We have like a blooming field of research with more than 700 academic articles. People are publishing books left, right, and center on that. The media is coming on the term, and we hear more and more about degrowth. You read the IPCC report, it talks about degrowth. You read biodiversity reports, it talks about degrowth. And so I feel that there's a whole generation, especially the younger generation, feeling energized by these concepts, not only degrowth, post-growth, eco-socialism, donut economies, these. And so seeing that energy for me is showing me it's a good sign. It means that, even though semantically you could say, wow, the term is really turn off, the fact that it's somehow attracting attention and making people passionate about, ultimately, it's not being passionate about degrowth in the same way that, when you have to do a diet, you're not passionate about losing weight. This is not your life project. Like, oh my God, I'm going to lose 20 kilos. And no, you have to lose 20 kilos because what you want is to be back in full health. Well, right now we can connect these topics being like in high-income countries today, we need a temporary phase of macroeconomic dieting, which I call degrowth, in order to land our economies within a sustainable scale. So these steady state post-growth economy that can prosper without growth.
Love it. What a brilliant answer. What strength, what clarity. Really love it. So if we consider we're in a transition, and I really love the idea of using strong words that galvanize people to have a conversation and then act based on that. That feels really resonant with me. Where can we peak, but peak just beyond? Like if we look at maybe from a country perspective, first of all. So we've seen Bhutan, I think it's Bhutan, have a gross happiness index, for example. And like, that's for me, for so long, GDP has been like probably our biggest blocker on any form of change that we require, because it's just the top metric in countries globally is GDP. So everything filters down from that. But where do we see that blue sky where people are making those changes, or where we can see some of that happening already? Do you have examples of, I know that you do, I'm just giving you a prompt to find them. Like, where is that? Where are people measuring things differently?
Yeah. So historically, as you said, GDP is an old indicator, comes back to the 1930s, so almost 100 years old. And the first serious alternative I remember well was the ESU, the Indicator of Sustainable Economic Welfare, designed in 1972. And since then, there's been like a full list of alternatives. You've mentioned the gross national happiness from Bhutan. We could also talk of the wellbeing budgets in New Zealand. We could talk about these well-being government alliance with Iceland, Wales, Scotland, some part of Canada, Finland, and New Zealand that have committed to, replacing GDP with more complex dashboard of social and ecological prosperity, like New Zealand has done in 2019. Goodbye GDP, welcome 65 indicators of social and ecological well-being. And so you see this at the level of some countries. You see this, of course, in academia and within organizations that have been developing and proposing alternative indicators. You see this at the level of some regions, certain municipality and certain departments here, for example, in France, of like, let's craft our own indicators of prosperity. Let's really change the software so that we can actually first see what sustainability feels like. If when you're planning for your municipal budget, you're doing this in euros, then biodiversity loss, overshooting carbon budgets, or water scarcity doesn't mean anything to you. But imagine you're planning urbanism and whatever you do in a municipality with a multi-indicator budget. that shows you, water footprint, energy demand, carbon emissions, quality of ecosystem services, along an array of social indicators, concrete measures of unmet needs. Then that allows you to have much more precise economic policy. And so that software absolutely needs to change. And that's not a scientific, it's not like we don't have the indicators. Some people may think, oh, we need to invent. No, they already exist. Like you can pick any on the list that will actually, it will fare so much better than GDP. Any on the list. And also companies use accounting. So in the same way that we're running our economies at the national level with a bit of an obsession with GDP, turning that into a fast and furious growth, grow at all cost kind of dynamics. Companies do the same, except their GDP is profits. So they want to maximize profits, and then they don't care about nature. They don't care about the well-being of their customers or the durability of the product. All they hear about is that going to increase my profits? If not, that's not my problem. And then that also creates nefarious incentives to, push down cost. When you hear like cheap, that's usually nature that suffers. Cheap means exporting your cost to nature and then pushing up prices. So here, in the same way, you can have a change of software at the level of the company, where the company say profits, forget about it. We're going to have a dashboard of indicators. We're going to look at the unmet needs that our activity is satisfying. We're going to look at the biophysical budgets that we're using. And then, of course, we're going to look at prices and cost and wages and investors and the economic viability. But that's going to be just one part of the equation and not the entirety raison d'être of a business.
So, it's interesting because as much as degrowth is gaining popularity, I think now triple bottom line accounting is starting to gather some speed, and with some larger organizations as well, where we're certainly starting to approach how we value the natural world. And even if mostly there's an acknowledgement that that's a challenge and something that needs to change. And there are some experiments around setting a carbon price, and there's not so many yet around biodiversity and nature. But a challenge there, and I've seen it in a lot of other areas of trying to get change to happen, is it's not enough to have it in just one space where you can say, oh, it's happening because there's a story here or this thing here. And so one of our raison d'etres, to use a phrase, is how do we scale it? Or how do we pollinate it? How do we propagate it? How do we grow that? How do we make that become the norm? Because what I've seen and what we can see is that these things that are very popular, they gain traction, but they reach this sort of point where they become part of the social accepted norms, and then not much changes. So something does change, but ultimately, so for example, like if we look at veganism, which has been great in some ways and has some unintended consequences, but it's pushed forward this premise. Now, if I go to Tesco's, then it's great. They've got a whole section for meatless meat, for example. But it's still a whole aisle of meat in that Tesco's thing. And so it's done really well, but it's ultimately not totally changed the system. It still just lives within the existing system. So what do we do about that? How do we solve that piece? How do we take these nascent, strong ideas and move them into being completely integral to everything that we do?
One word, exnovation. And I'm going to explain what it means. I just wanted to
What was that word?
Sorry, I missed concept. Exnovation. Like innovation with exnovation. Innovation is taking something novel in. Exnovation is taking something out. And so what makes degrowth special compared to, sustainable development, sustainability transition, the just transition, the circular economy, all these initiatives, is that instead of taking an additive approach to be like, for example, today the problem is we eat too much meat. So the additive solution would be we need to create a lot of new vegan products. And so people then they will shift to these products and they will stop to produce meat. That you're creating another option. And then you hope that people will just stop consuming the first option. And of course, we need to have the replacement option. But sometimes innovation is not enough. See that for electric cars. It's not enough to know. We've been having electric cars for a while. What matters is you need to replace actual fossil cars with electric cars. So you need to, for the electric car, to exnovate the fossil cars in the same way you need plant-based product to exnovate meat consumption. And so here, today, I think the main challenge is to shut down certain processes of production. So to take a subtractive approach to the sustainability transition. And that is actually quite complementary to the sense of like, you are somehow imposing a lot of constraint on the stuff you want to reduce, and that creates spaces for the stuff that you want to increase. So for example, like in the Netherlands, when they decide to have a policy to cut by half the number of cows they have in their cattle stock, that's kind of their environmental policy. It's a volume-based, we just want to shrink the number of cows we have. So it's a, production shutdown kind of approach. And that means that creates a demand space for plant-based alternative to know, well, we're going to have a lot of people that used to eat beef. Now we cannot do this for environmental reasons because the footprint is too high. And so there's the market that's going to open for alternatives. And right now, I mean, if we look at what's been happening in the last decades, additive solutions have not worked very well because they tend actually to just add themselves on top. So if you have electric cars and plant-based alternative, they're going to go on top of, fossil cars and meat. They're going to come. So it's not basically a substitution. It's not a real transition. It's just an addition of option. We're basically Netflixing the number of stuff we can use. Whereas the priority right now, if you want to decrease, for example, greenhouse gases, we know what we need to do. Less cars on the road, less planes in the sky, less sticks in the mouth, and, less fossil fuels in your home heatings, less constructed buildings, less construction of roads, and, less use of concrete, these kind of stuff. It's not a matter of alternatives. We need somehow to manage to reduce these.
Are you working to take action on climate, nature, social and sustainability goals? Then you can apply to join our community of action at futureplanet.love. Through an intentional community of your peers and subject matter experts, online and live events, and a knowledge-sharing platform, the Future Planet Community of Action empowers you to share energy and expertise, receive support, find solutions, gain the confidence to make decisions, and collaborate to have a greater impact. To discover more and apply to join, visit futureplanet.love. Right, let's get into it.
That feels true. Let's push it further. It's good. It's a strong answer. But I did this project. I'm going to share a little bit about a project I did, and I loved doing it. It was about getting reusable plates into a festival with a dear friend of mine, Kath, from Unpackaged. And we did a trial. The intention was how to get the whole of a festival to be using reusable. And our trial was optional. And so, yeah, sure, I agree with you about the swapping and swapping out. So we didn't take away everything. But because it was optional, we had maybe 10%, 5 or 10% people take up the option of having reusable. And so I think that speaks to what you're doing. So what my learning from that was everyone has to do something. Otherwise, you just have to make it the only way that something can be done. So I think that aligns with what you're sharing there in terms of like, we can't add, we have to subtract, and we can't have two things. We have to replace something, for example. Although there is some question mark that I have around what are we replacing it with. So I don't think electric cars are the thing we would replace it with, for example. Maybe it's more public transport or something like that. Anyway, just that's important to say. So ultimately, in a systemic world where we've got lots of groups of people that decide they're going to be part of an organization, and then lots of people that are part of a country and then part of the world, we have these governing structures for each, or these indicators for each, and they connect to each other because they ladder up. Unless we can unlock the key, how do we unlock that? Like, it's not enough for one company to do triple bottom line accounting. It's not enough for 10 companies to do triple bottom line accounting. It's not enough for 100 companies to do triple bottom line accounting. It's not enough for one country to have a happiness index. You have to get everyone doing it. Otherwise, it sort of doesn't quite work. So what I'm asking, I know what I'm asking. How do we solve that bit? Like, where do we go? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to engage? What's that process for getting this beyond a light bulb and getting it into like illuminating everyone?
Yeah. I mean, first, we must realize that depending, of course, on the indicators, but if we're talking for greenhouse gases for a second, their production is very concentrated within a few companies. So, changing the accounting framework of, all your small, like local shop and massage therapist and whatever is not really what matters. I don't know if you've seen this study about the carbon majors showing that, 71% of emissions can be linked up to only 100 companies. It's a debatable,
it's a confusing thing but it's a good top line story. But I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is hotspots, focus on what matters.
Yeah, in for example, if we want to get rid of fossil fuels, which is a priority, then we can target certain sectors. Aviation sector, same thing. Very few companies run the global aviation sectors. Automobiles, same thing. Small sectors with big corporations. Fossil fuel companies, even smaller. You could fit everyone, all CEOs of fossil companies in rather a small room and have them discussed. So it's a problem that is more concentrated than we think it is. But so, for example, if we were to decide, I don't know, just let's say, we were talking about transports and, alternatives. I think we realize today most flights, I think it must be the same in the US. It's actually this in Europe and in France, most flights, they're national flights. Okay. They're national flights. And in France, I know the US is not exactly the same, but in France, most of these flights, they have train alternatives. We're a very small country. We have train.
And actually, have they not banned them recently, or there's some talk of them being banned?
They've tried, but that actually only led to the shutdown of 2 lines. So it was basically a bullshit policy that was
it's better
watered down.
None, or
it's better than none, or I don't know, maybe even worse, because just all that years of preparation and discussing of that policy just leading to the shutdown of 2 lines where they're going to build a new airport and open new lines the year after. It's actually might just rebound into more effect because people may think, oh, we've dealt with this. Now we have green aviation because we have a policy on that. So if you decide, for example, like, okay, we invite all the airlines that are using the French territory and we're like, okay, guys, we have to close a number of lines. Like they've done in Amsterdam, the airport deciding to have quotas, being like, we're going to only have 80% of, flights compared to last year. That's the quota we're having. And then you sit down, you decide, what line do we close? Which one do we keep? It's a democratic decisions. You decide best in line with justice and well-being. But at least you have a fail-safe strategy to reduce emissions that doesn't involve everyone. At this level is just a production shutdown. So basically, and of course, aviation is going to be talking to train companies to prepare for the transfer of some of their passengers to the train. And of course, there's going to be broader discussions about avoiding mobility in the first place, like just we're doing right now. I don't have to take a plane to travel to your living room to record that podcast because we've managed somehow to avoid that travel through social organization. There's much more of that we can do. As a scholar, we used to go everywhere for conferences. I've not been to physical conferences for years since COVID because now we're doing everything online. And actually, we're fine. It runs smoothly.
And you can surf this afternoon.
And I can surf this afternoon, which is pretty good. So it's definitely a win for me.
This is an immediate benefit from the reduction of flights.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that. How just degrowing the size of the monetary economy comes necessarily with a decrease in working time, which we should not be afraid of. But before coming back to that point, I just want to say something about, as you said, like infrastructures that determines what kind of behavior is possible. So right now in France, we have a number of highway extension projects, which is nonsensical because the priority right now is to reduce material, water, energy, carbon footprint more than just, gain 10 minutes on some, car transportation from one city to another. And all the money we want to invest in mobility should be invested in, low carbon modes of transportation, trams, trains and all that kind of stuff. So here, as soon as you build a highway, you build what we call a path dependency, because the highway is there. Now it's going to be an option. And so people, of course, are going to take it. But if you don't build the highway and instead use that money to improve, the train system, have night trains, have trains where you can bring your bike, trains with fast Wi-Fi where you can work, then you create another options for people to actually have these kind of sufficiency practices of being like, I'm not going to fly, I'm going to take the train. Same thing within the city. If you decide we're going to make that bit car free, but we're going to invest massively into bike lanes, and then you can see the transformation like we've seen in Amsterdam. I lived there for a couple of years. In the 80s and 70s, it was just a car-filled cities just like Paris or Los Angeles, and now it's a full car-free city just with bikes everywhere. And when you live in Amsterdam, the option of taking your bike is actually the most efficient to move around. And then you've generated a lot of co-benefits. So here, and you were right to kind of like point the finger at the electric cars of actually in this kind of triad of action of avoiding unnecessary mobility and then shifting to most sustainable modes of transport and then improving these modes of transport so that in time they become more and more efficient. Degrowth locates itself at the first stage of like pondering, well, if we simplify some of our needs, do we really need to move that much? Like holidays, do we need every year when we go to holiday to go to a very foreign countries? Or maybe there are places within our own countries accessible by train that we've not seen that where we can have at least as much fun. That's, one part of mobility that can be avoided. Then you shift. Once you've decided, I need to go somewhere. I do need to go to Brussels because I'm speaking to the parliament and I cannot do this online. Well, then instead of taking a flight, I'm just going to take the train. And then you improve. Since I need to take the train, I want that train to be as low carbon, low water, low biodiversity, low energy, low whatever, low matter than we can. And that's where we, focus all the technological progress we can have on actually just sobering up these technologies we have not managed to stop using.
What I hear is somewhat of a patchwork of solutions, depending on where those hotspots of challenge are or where those opportunity spaces are. And what I notice is that's a lot of what this work is. It's about helping people to understand, how did you do it? What was it? How did I do it? Why did we do it? Where did we do it? All these interesting questions that you can ask about a particular project or how we got a policy to change or why we did that. And a lot of the power of this is in storytelling, is in sharing those stories with new people that can receive it and understand and learn how to implement that in their worlds. Is it the same for everyone? We all live in different types of worlds. Like, how do we think about it from a just transition perspective? Like, it sort of feels like when you're sharing, like actually probably if maybe even just 1,000 people were to just sort this out, we'd almost be fine. I'm just giving a guess as to a number. For example, the people that are making sure that they make the most money, the people that are running the countries and companies that want to make the most money, for example. It's a very simplistic view. But how does this then work when we consider, what does degrowth look like for someone in a country that's thinking about growth, right? That's thinking, well, we need to achieve a quality of life in this country that's similar to other people that we see around the world? Or how do we approach that piece?
I mean, first, I'm approaching it by first looking at how do most people benefit from economic growth. The answer to that is, it's not a secret or a conspiracy theory. You can just look decades after decades when an economy gets bigger. So when national income increases, who gets what? And the answer is, like, in most high-income countries now, the split of that growth is very uneven. The most uneven is Australia. Latest numbers showed us that in the decade between 2009 and 2019, 93% of the gains of economic growth have been appropriated by the 10% richest Australians, arguably the one that needed it the least, because, you guys are already at the top. You don't need more money to satisfy your unmet needs. Actually, if economic growth were an effective strategy in eradicating poverty and lowering inequality, we would want all the financial gains to go to the bottom. Thing is, it doesn't do that. I think within a capitalist system and the way it's wired in, it cannot work in that way. And within not even capitalism, but within any economy, it cannot work at all because an infinite growth is biophysically impossible. So even that, if you're France and you're expecting, even if all the gains of economic growth could be concentrated on the 50% poorest French households, that will still be unsustainable. So we somehow need to increase their living power, their quality of life, by just using the infrastructure we have, which is actually possible. In some calculations a colleague of mine has done in France, has been looking at national income and comparing this to the hypothetical national income you would need to satisfy the needs of all the French population. It's calculating using the living wage approach. And basically, it just estimates how much money you need to satisfy everyone's needs in the sense of for everyone to be able to have a decent living defined by themselves. So you take people and you ask, what do you need every day to live a decent life? And they'll tell you, I need to bring my kids to schools, I need medicine for my grandmother, blah, 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 all of that. I need a house, I need energy, and then you monetize. Well, then we realized that in France last year, we have, a 44% surplus. So let's say you reduce national income by 44% in France. Theoretically, you still have enough for no one to be in poverty. This is not the case today. Poverty in France has been systematically increasing in the last 30 years, while GDP has been increasing. So what I see is now we need a proportional approach of right now, most of environmental pressures, they're the result of actually a minority of people. So maybe you've heard that number that the 10% richest individuals on Earth are responsible for 48% of global emissions. So when we say 10%, that means 780 million people. So that's actually quite narrow. If you target on changing the behaviors of these people, which arguably are the ones that are most likely to be able to change their behaviors because they're not in a vulnerable position where if you lose your job, where if your car breaks down, where if you cannot afford your medicine, you're going to fall in poverty. These people, they're already at the top of the power chain, so they can try stuff. If you manage to change this, you affect 48% of all emissions. On the other hand, if you, try to change the behaviors of 4 billion people, out the poorest half of humanity, you're only affecting 12% of world emissions. So here again, inequality is a way of narrowing down the problem. And I think it's a sign of hope because we realize, oh, wow, actually the kind of stuff we need to change is not, having to do with human nature and the way we think. It's not having to do with convincing other countries to do anything. No, it's just having to do with within a pack of high-income countries deciding to shut down all the things that are somehow today causing enormous damage to the environment. And so therefore working with the people that have been consuming these goods and services, just talking about planes. You talk about planes to most people on Earth, they don't care because, less than 10% of humans have been on a plane ever. Even when you look at actual emissions of commercial aviation, half of these emissions are caused by 1% of humans. And if you look at these emissions, the majority of them are caused by people who fly more than 4 or 5 times per year, which is a very sub-minority of humans, all of them being very rich. So when we talk about this is not oh my God, that's so against freedom, we're going to have to sacrifice. No, a minority of people will have somehow to consume less resource, here fly less, so that a majority of people can have access to something that is wonderful, the ability to take a plane to go somewhere. If we want to share that good equitably, then we need the people that are over-consuming to consume less so that people that are under-consuming can consume more.
So we're just asking a few people to be a bit more reasonable, which feels very reasonable. Well, I could get behind that. I think it's interesting as well that I like this idea that it allows a lot more clarity, a lot more focus, a lot more intentionality. It puts those green frequent flyer mile clubs into perspective.
That should be illegal. It should be actually the opposite. That's what we call a progressive tax on consumption. That's the instrument that was proposed by Stay Grounded, which is a UK initiative that had been talking of degrowth of aviation. And they proposed this, what they call the frequent flyer levy. So to be you take your first flight, it's untaxed because that's kind of the basic needs flight everyone can have access to. If you fly twice, then you get a 1 to 100 euros tax on that. You fly 3 times, then you get to 500-600. The price increases the more you fly, which sounds normal. And we could go even more into the details, and to be even the first flight, the price should be different. If you're very rich, then your price should be very much higher than if you're poor, in the same way that when you go to the cinema or for certain services, if you're homeless or if you're out of a job, you're going to pay a reduced price because you don't have much purchasing power. Well, same thing for these stuff. Having an equal price on these scarce resources give a disproportionate right for rich individuals to have access to these resources.
I think that's a very rational and very reasonable approach to it. And I really think it's a practical, proactive solution that could arrive. And it's definitely one that makes sense. And actually, from the ballot box perspective, you're not alienating that many people unless we think about books like The Establishment, in which case it becomes a bit harder. But I also think the second thing about that is it would be wonderful to be able to show a direct line between that tax and then investment in the alternative system approach. And if we look at, for example, public transport there, if we're improving public transport for everyone, then we're improving public transport for everyone, which sounds obvious. But when we think about just transition, like this redistribution of wealth, this refocus of where we're doing it. So if we said, normally I fly by plane, I don't know how I could stomach flying or taking the train. And we say, well, let's make it convenient and much nicer and much easier and better for you to be able to fly, to take the train. Everyone then benefits from that investment and everyone feels more together in that space. And then people that maybe had less would be able to travel with more comfort and more ease. And suddenly you have a space which is more equitable. Yeah. Anyway, you want to say something there? You're stroking your chin. Maybe you want to add something.
That's what I do when I have an insight.
Yeah, it's arriving.
Maybe some of our listeners I've seen these pictures where they compare, the space you need when single cars to move 50 people versus a bus to move 50 people, Vegas, and you see that it's much more efficient to move a few hundred people on the train than if you move them through like each having an individual cars. So through that logic, you're right. Massive investment in public infrastructures in general are absolutely necessary to see individual sufficiency becoming viable for individuals. And that's, I think so. That's the key. That's the key for prosperity without growth. Because if you somehow imagine to just produce, let's just take an example. Even within the car-based system, we're still producing cars, but instead of selling individual cars, like 1 or 2 per households, we just have car sharing systems, and we can allow to have just 1 car per like street, or a couple of stars per streets, like we've seen. Just like in theory, you still have the same well-being, but you just have much less cars, because we know that when you buy a car, 95% of the time it's just parked unused.
Yeah, so this is great in principle, and it's something that's I've agreed, right? But the challenge with it. There's a challenge with it when I have to, if you can't provide something that's a better alternative. So if I have to remove the convenience, I'm not saying me, I'm just using me in the whatever. If I have to remove the convenience of being able to walk outside and get my car and do whatever I want, whenever I want, not have to talk to anyone, I can leave my food wrappers on the floor. I could just do what I want. And I'm used to that. Maybe I don't leave food wrappers. Maybe I just whatever. And I'm used to that. Changing to the alternative is difficult. So if I'm used to flying first class and I have all this space and I get asked if I would like some food all the time, asking me to then go coach is difficult. Like, I'm less excited about coach. And I think a lot of these things, like it's the alternative that's being proposed, contains often less excitement, and it feels like I have to have less as a result. Now, there's a good example, which is your being on Zoom here and us not meeting in person. Okay, well, we've offsetted the ability to have a hug and connect and say hi in person, have a beer, with you being able to go surfing and us saving energy and time. And so we can understand what that is. But I think a lot of these challenges, the trade-off is too difficult. And it's a bit like when you squeeze toothpaste out of a tube, the saying, it's like you can't get the toothpaste back in.
Yeah.
When you felt what it feels like to have your own jet and to not have to mix with other people, that you don't want to go back, right? Like that you would really resist, like a lot would resist. That's an interesting challenge. And so if we're thinking about sharing stories of solutions, how did you do this policy? How did you do that? There's also a real thing around PR, around feelings about like, what is my life like now? Like I've changed, like, how is it now? Or how does it feel better? So you sort of have this need to invest in the experience of people, and then this need to communicate the benefits of that new experience. I feel there's something, anyway. How does that sound? What do you think about that?
That reminds me of two studies I quite like. The first one, it was an Australian nurse that has been following patients and end of life patients during her entire career, and she was always asking them, the same questions. And she did this, study at the end, just asking people dying, what they regret most about life, what they value in the life they've lived, and she found out that results are extremely homogeneous, regardless of gender, classes, age, cultures, locality. Basically, people are like, I wish I'd spent more time with the people I love. I wish I'd, learned the trumpet instead of working too much. I wish I had gone surfing instead of just writing that paper. I wish, I'd done that. No one ever said, I really wish I had just accumulated more money. I really wish I had boosted that GDP a bit more. And so here we realize something that is, I think, quite true and explored a bit more conceptually by the British philosopher Kate Soper in her book, Post-Growth Living, which is this idea that this kind of materialist, consumerist, individualist dream that has been sold to us mostly by for-profit corporations doing massive advertising is not the recipe to happiness. It actually makes people miserable. And look at it, even the people, with massive salaries and their private jets, they're complaining not having enough time. They do burnouts. They have, loss of values, and they lost touch with reality. Even them, they are the most powerful humans on the planet. They have everything you could potentially have, and they feel miserable. That's what Kate Soper documents in her book. So I feel like the first argument is to say, if it is true that somehow happiness lies in human relations, lies in basically also what we call time wealth, just have enough time to do the thing you want to do. Don't feel stressed about these endless to-do lists. You're autonomous, in control of your time. You can decide to apply your hours in things you feel passionate about, and you can have deep qualitative relationship with people around, which also demands time. If you manage to do this, I think most people, they would not care, sharing their washing machines, or not, having a car that is twice as small, or just, taking the trains when they go to holiday instead of taking a plane, because they would gain ultimately the one thing humans seek. This Adam Smith in his theory of moral sentiments was summing down basically what human desires to. We just want to be loved by the one we love.
Yeah, to connect. Yeah.
And so that's my first answer, which is the nice bit. I think you can frame it as a kind of improvement in well-being. That's why I say degrowth can be made for the sake of improving well-being, just because economic growth today and the blind pursuit of profits by businesses is not connected to quality of life anymore.
Yeah. Can you hold your next thing? Can I talk about this with
sure.
you a bit? Yeah. I love that. And a lot of what we do is we build community and connection. And what I've really noticed over time is it's when you have close personal relationships with people, where you share moments with them and share how you feel in those moments with them and have authentic connection, that's when it's most resonant. And so my feeling is this world will partly be evolved because we share different messages with each other and communicate in different ways with each other, and remove the corporate communications and share something different. But I feel like the more heart-centered way for me on this is that we invite each other to new experiences. We share new experiences with small groups, and those small groups grow and grow and grow, and we widen the circle. Yeah, anyway, this is part of what I feel and think. And the other thing that arose for me was, so that means that we're really going to need to, and there's joy in this, feel and think more about the solutions we create for each other to live in the world we want to live in. So if we look at something like Olio, or it's a great app in the UK that enables people to share food, for example. Well, I really like FreeCycle. Like I love FreeCycle, man. Like FreeCycle, I have something I no longer need. I put it on a list. I don't sell it, but someone comes to my door, and the joy in that moment of them receiving that thing is like a really exciting moment for me, because I didn't worry about the price. They didn't worry about the price. They received something that I didn't need anymore. It helps them in their life. Only joy comes from that moment. So there's something for me around, if we feel into that and we're understanding that actually it's about creating different values or having a different way of being, or a different way of feeling, different value structure. And then when we're building something to solve a challenge, like washing our clothes or, I don't know, eating or whatever, it's maybe we ask ourselves, how are we creating joy in this moment? If our most important thing is how are we creating joy, or how are we like being in balance, or how, so there's something there in that, like when we're building, that changes the way that we build something. That's no longer like, how are we going to make money? It's like, how are we going to, I don't know, spark joy, or how are we going to give something, which I think is a lot of what the regenerative movement is around that, right? How are we going to give back more than we took? Because that's great. That feels lots better. I think that feels lots better. I'm rattling now, and I'm going to go a bit further. The challenge for me is, how do you help people to awaken up to that feeling? Like, because a lot of people, for them, what feels like joy for them is, I bought something, I have something, I see something I need, I have it. And so there's something there as well. Like,
I can attempt to connect a few dots.
I love that. Thank you.
Today, like, if access to goods and services requires money, if you need to pay, for rent, for food, for your car to be fixed, for your kids to be watched, all of that, you need a massive amount of money, which means you lose your freedom to basically say, you know what? I don't want to work in marketing. I want to be a musician. I want to work on, saving the oceans. I want to do that. You can't, because you need to have a certain quantity of money every month to pay for this stuff you need. So the question for me as a macroeconomist is like, how can we reduce the amount of money you need per month so that you can actually gain some autonomy over the use of your time? And the question here has to do with, how do we form prices, especially in businesses? What we realize today in a city, for example, like Paris, rents are getting crazy. Why? Because it's a very simple dynamics. Rich people take their savings, they invest them into buying houses and apartments, then they rent. They don't do this for fun. They do this to sell at a higher price, to make money. That's an investment for them. All of that kind of for-profit mentality drives up housing prices. And so the people who do not own apartments and houses, which is most of people, then they feel stuck in that situation where if your rent increase, you're not going to move out and live in the streets. And so therefore you're losing a bit of the autonomy you have over your time. If you come with an instrument, a macroeconomic instrument to be, guys, housing is so important, it should not be a capitalist commodity. So price controls. Whatever we do, you cannot rent in that district more than can the average of rents in the district. And you cannot sell more than the average of the square meter price within that district. Same thing, it's just to avoid things getting out of control. Same thing for all basic goods and services. Or if you want to be even more disruptive, you'd be like, housing needs to be a not-for-profit sector. It's too important. Food needs to be a not-for-profit sector. Energy, telecommunication, all these things, we cannot entrust them into for-profit corporations, because what do? They minimize costs, they maximize prices, and then they just get us stuck individually into a situation where sufficiency, where changing jobs, where focusing on the things we want to focus on becomes an impossibility. That's not utopia. If you look at Vienna in Austria, in Europe, you have a city since World War II where all the housing sectors has been not for profit, because they decided after World War II to be housing is too important. So no one individually can become rich, investing in the housing sector. All the surplus generated within housing in Vienna is reinvested into the quality and accessibility of the housing. Result, it has the lowest rent of all European capitals and the highest quality because it's been decades and decades of reinvesting. If you compare this to Amsterdam, London, or Paris, where basically people get rich investing in this and then they take the money, invest it somewhere else. And what you have now is just crap buildings with very low energy efficiency, that like we have in Paris with absolutely unpayable rents. So here's just a decision, and that decision is not light. It means basically, stepping out of capitalism because it means restricting, let's say, the areas of your economy that can be directed by market dynamics and being like, guys, housing is too important. So when we decide of the price of something, we need to sit down and be like, is that price fair? Can everyone pay it? Is it not someone that is just speculating and making a lot more money out of it? And we should not accept as an answer the fact that, it's just demand and supply. I mean,
I'm with you. And I'm noticing that I'm with you. I'm with you. In theory, the challenge that we have, right? And I'm with you in a world of practice as well. Like I would love to be present in the world that we're thinking about. But in practice, all I'm thinking of is all these large organizations and businesses. And I understand Kodak, I understand this, but I'm just like, if we think about 3, 5, 10, 15 years, like this is a transitionary moment, 20 years maybe. In some ways, we don't have that much time. In some ways, we have more time. Like I'm with you, but how, like, we can't say to people, no more businesses that buy and sell property. That would be very difficult to get that kind of thing to fly. Like, what's that transitionary moment like? How do we transition in that way? Otherwise, surely you isolate yourself. I know you, like it's important to be strong, but it's also isolatory as well. How do we like create the bridge between the two worlds?
I mean, I don't know if did you watch the TV series Extrapolations?
I'm going to go and watch it after this.
Yeah. So guys, watch it. There's a few episodes and it's what we call cli-fi. It's the mix between climate and science fiction, sci-fi. So it's science fiction about the climate, and in Extrapolation, we see basically the kind of future we're heading if we're not doing anything. And here we realize that the thing we're bargaining is of two different kinds. Like we cannot argue with the climate. The thing that is actually not going to fly is actual birds and pollinators because they'll be dead. So the thing we can negotiate is the price of an apartment. That's like a stupidly human thing. Or just like the price of carrots or the price of, medicine.
No, I get you. And it's important to not like, and I like the way you shared that in that way, but it's important to not like, it's important to keep focused and keep tight. Like, let's look for an interesting answer here. If I'm in a property organization or I work in the property sector and you say to me, well, actually, you probably shouldn't exist as a for-profit company. But if I already have shareholders and I already have investments in property, that's not a straightforward transition. It might be. Maybe it's in the world that you see, and I love this world, maybe it's a very clear, like easy set of decisions. But so how do you start changing? I watched this other show, right? This is a guilty pleasure, but I think it's called $1 Million Townhouse or something. It's set in New York, and it's got like people that sell extremely expensive apartments, and they hustle them. And this whole culture is built on high value, high prices. So in that world, their value structure would look at this and go, "Oh my God, this is just I can't even compute that. That's not even. I don't even." So my question is, and I get Vienna. And I would say my sense, without looking into it, that's a moment in time that would be difficult to recreate, right? Like as soon as I say that, I realize that maybe this feels like it is the same level of challenge, but at the same time, like it's difficult to recreate that moment. What is the first step in that path? Is that price limitations? Is that the first step? Like, how would a for-profit company exist in this world that you're sharing as a first step?
I mean, the first thing is to realize that there are already many not-for-profit businesses around the world. One of my good colleagues, Jennifer Hinton, she spent her entire career just studying the dynamics of this not-for-profit businesses. They do exactly the same thing that their competition is doing. The only difference is that instead of, distributing a lot of profits to shareholders, which usually, attracts investors that are not really interested in the business you're doing, but more in the money you can make, well, they reinvest the profit either in the company or through a foundation to the kind of social and ecological issue they're dealing with. And I mean, that's usually businesses that are much more flexible and agile in terms of innovation because they can, deal with unmet needs that are not only predetermined by how much money you can make. So first, if we realize that some businesses have already done this transition, that today for the economy, I know in France, we've seen a spike in the last few years of those not-for-profit cooperatives that are just blooming. People, it seems to fit. People manage to make them work. And then some companies transition to them. So we can start to look at that. Then on the other questions of of course, some shareholders are going to lose. They're going to lose potential earnings and they're going to lose actual earnings and investment. And that's come back to the same question of, how are we going to convince the people with the private jets to not take their private jet? The honest answer is you won't, because it must be fantastic to have a private jet. I mean, if I had a private jet, maybe I'd just love it. I would go to, everywhere instead of, taking the train. When I do back and forth, Sweden to France is at least 20 hours of travel and 4 different trains. So I would love to do this on a private jet. But the fact is that these people are so few, that it doesn't really matter. In the same way here, shareholders of big corporations, especially in the kind of sectors that are of high need of regulation and price controls, there's so few. So of course they're going to be going against, of course they're going to lobby, but what they're facing is the majority, the rest of the people. And so if we are living in democracies, we need to be able to somehow represent the interest of the majority of the people and decide that, well, if we price control medicine, then we broaden access, we, increase quality of life. And yes, we decrease the earnings of a couple of thousand people that have invested a lot in the pharmaceutical sectors to get even richer than they already were. You know what? I'm not going to cry over that. For me, as a macroeconomist, I call that economic progress because I will see indicator of quality of life increase. Nice.
So what I hear is price control and people perhaps demanding that at the ballot box, or so you need, the right political representation to get that across the line, whatever that organizational body needs. And then I'm also hearing more effective not-for-profit or for-benefit type corporations, organizations, which we're seeing in other sectors. B Corp and others are growing in popularity. But looking at these heavy consumption, heavy impact areas that we're talking about and reimagining how we might serve people and be of service in those areas to people. Nice. So I'm noticing where, I could just go on and on with you on this. It feels like every door we open, we could go through to another door, which feels fantastic. But noticing that the time and people have been really intently listening for this long. So feels like we should sort of wrap, but even if we maybe explore different topics at a different time. Do you feel like in all of your sharing, there is something that you were like, you know what? I really just feel like this is the thing that I wanted to share. Like, this is my, either your summary, or maybe there's I really wanted to share this thing, or is there one more? Maybe there might not be, but do you feel like there's something that you haven't shared that you'd like to share?
I mean, I'm so happy we talked about price controls because that's one of my passion as an economist. But I mean, really, right now I'm looking through, I'm going through public expenditures in France of the French government. And so I'm looking through, most of that is health expenditures, and most of health, a big part of health expenditures is the cost because we somehow outsource health services to the private sector. And then you're looking at the margins of these sectors. And especially in time of inflation, you look at what we call profit-led inflation. So the inflation, the increase of prices that is not explained by an increase of cost, just by an increase of margins, because businesses, they're like, wow, everyone is increasing prices. Let's just make a bit more of a profit out of it, which is normal. If you're a for-profit business, you can do this. But if we have here, we see that it's counterproductive for everyone, even for themselves, because in doing this, then their competition at some point will make more profit than they do. And so they will find themselves in a suboptimal situation where they will have to suffer as consumers from the increase, of prices that they have themselves caused. So it's a bit like this situation when you're in the cinema and everyone is sitting, chilling, everything is good, and you're like, I'm just gonna stand up so I see a bit better. And then you're standing up, and the people behind are like, what the fuck? And so they stand up to see better. And then people behind them, they're like, and then they stand up. Then we all stand up, and then we reach the exact same situation we had when we were sitting, except now we're not sitting and we have our legs tired. So at some point, it's nice to be like, guys, I mean, as we do when you go to the cinema, there's this kind of like unspoken agreement that we're all going to remain seated during the movie so that we can enjoy. Right now, we should have a similar agreement that the love of the economy being, guys, in order not to completely destroy, ecosystems which underlies everything we produce in our economy, let's, agree to some kind of limitation, democratic downscaling of certain production and consumption, so that we can actually, have the economy keep doing what the economy is supposed to do, deliver well-being. That's what an economy is for. Deliver well-being. And then I'm going to finish with that because that's my favorite point. The economy need to destroy work. That's what it needs. Every year you want basically the amount of hours and resources you need to mobilize to satisfy your needs to get lower. And so from one year to another, you want to go from 40 hours work week to 35 to 32 to 30 to 28 to 25 to 24 to 20. That's what I call economic progress. Less time where you actually predetermined time, constrained time, where you have to work to do things you've not decided to do. And then every year you're freeing what we call autonomous time, where you can decide to do. And we realize when you study sociologically what people do, they don't only just go surfing and nap, which is most of my activities. They will go and start contributing to Wikipedia. They will get active in a political party. They will start, being active in the community, doing things. And some of these things actually create so much more value in social ecological terms that what they would do in their paid employment, especially in their stuck in bullshit jobs doing things that macroeconomically have no value, like real estate agents or people working in marketing. Like these two things, you would phase them out tomorrow. Like all real estate agents in the world could be replaced by a single website or a bunch of websites that just link up, buyers and sellers. That's one profession. I'm thinking about this because as I walk in town and I invite people to think about it when you walk in the street and start counting real estate agencies. Every time you see one, you can think that is a waste of resource, waste of human neurons, waste of energy, waste of materials. Same thing, every time you see an ad, you're like, we've wasted one creative mind in designing this crap ad to buy a SUV we didn't need. So to see the economy from this perspective of sufficiency, what is the minimum amount of work and energy and materials so that we can spare also the planet that we need in order to live a decent life, which is a completely different question than the one an economist is usually asking, which is how do we maximize economic growth?
Yeah, I can't do this. It can't close. And so when you're then talking about this, it's about how we then consider universal basic income within this, for example, context. It's how we look at artificial intelligence and machine learning and how that fits within this context. There's something about the letting go of this sort of, just because we've done something the way that we've always done it doesn't mean that we need to do it in the same way that we've always done it. And so what I hear you saying is not that the people that are choosing to be real estates in this moment in time are not good people. What you're saying is, hey, you could do anything else that you chose to do. There's any number of things that we could do within society which would play a different role, or where we would play a different role, where if we choose to understand what our role would be, it's I want to have meaning, I want to add value, I want to have a purpose, I want to feel good, I want to have interactions that feel good in what I do, I want to be able to do something that enables me to provide for my family, whatever this mixture of things is. Like I love what you're sharing is let's reimagine those. And oh my God, I'm so angry about AI right now. Like a lot of people are just saying, oh, AI, how can we do more of this thing? Which is not necessarily the thing that we would choose we want to do more of. And in reality, it's about rethinking all these wonderful tools that we now have around us. The biggest thing for me is about rebalancing. I don't think we have a lack of anything we need. We have too much of everything. We have too much of everything. It's more about just being observational and of being intentional and of rebalancing the way that we are in the world, and the future that you love, the world that you are looking towards, is one where we spend less of our time doing things that are just about okay, and we spend more of our time doing things that we find rewarding, fulfilling, enriching. They enrich both our lives and our social fabric, which has immeasurable benefits in terms of our wealth, health, and well-being. So I know I summarized it, right? Like I feel like it's a lot of this is how we look at these things. You can add something there. I don't need to be the person that ends it, but like that's like, yeah.
I agree with this, and just to bounce back on the analogy is just us deciding, to sit down at the cinema, this great macroeconomic cinema that is the economy, to be, guys, if we sit down, we're going to save the energy of actually standing and gain some comfort. So as you said, if we agree, let's say something's very small example. In France, most of the automobile ad expenditure goes to SUVs. So basically, per SUV in France, the cost of advertising is 2,400 euros per SUV. So if you had in one room all the manufacturers of SUVs, and you can probably have them around a lunch table, being like, guys, let's stop fighting over this positional crap and polluting cities and the internet with our ads, we would, from one day to another, have cars that are 2,400 euros cheaper per car, and we would liberate the neurons of so many marketers that could use their creativity solving other problems than forcing us to use cars that are actually completely inappropriate to the needs that we have. So imagine like this logic of self-limitation, democratically decided self-limitation that in the end translate into well-being. And you said it very well. It's a social political decision. It's not about shaming individuals in the system. It's about changing the rules of the economic game.
I could go on for hours with you. This has been extremely fun. And I hope that we connect again on these topics. It feels like what a pleasure, what a delight. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the fruits of your insights. Yeah, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me for this night talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Please like, rate and share this widely on your social channels. The more people that we can welcome to join us on the journey and support the change makers we champion, the faster we can combat climate change, battle biodiversity loss, and co-create a future we can all love. Where do we go next? What questions did this spark for you? Would you like to know more about a particular topic? Who shall we adventure to? What shall we ask them? Where shall we go? What shall we build? How shall we do this together? Do you have any questions or comments? Join the Future Planet community of action at futureplanet.love to sign in, sign up, and get involved. Together, we can.